The bells of Blackthorn Cathedral tolled across the snow-covered capital like a funeral hymn disguised as celebration, their deep notes rolling through the gray winter sky while thousands gathered to witness the marriage that all believed would end in humiliation. Beneath towering spires of ancient stone, nobles wrapped in velvet and silver fur crowded the aisles, eager not merely for a wedding but for a spectacle. In a kingdom where gossip traveled faster than ravens, the arranged union between King Aldrich Blackthorn and Lady Alara Ashbourne had become the season's favorite cruelty. The cathedral blazed with candlelight. Golden flames danced across stained-glass windows depicting generations of Lycan rulers, casting colored shadows upon polished marble floors. The scent of pine garlands and winter roses drifted through the air, but beneath the perfume lingered anticipation sharpened by malice. Every noble household had arrived carrying rumors, and every rumor concerned the bride. She is plain, they say. Plain would be generous. The king shall scarcely look at her. I hear her family begged for this alliance. The whispers slithered between pews like serpents. At the far end of the cathedral stood King Aldrich. Even among warriors he seemed carved from another race entirely. He towered over every man present, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, his dark hair falling to the collar of a black ceremonial coat embroidered with silver wolves. The years had given him the reputation of a living legend. He had crushed rebellions, defended borders, and expanded the kingdom's influence without ever appearing uncertain. Songs celebrated his victories. Enemies feared his name. Yet no ballad spoke of affection. At 33, the Lycan King had rejected every noble woman presented to him. Some claimed his standards were impossible. Others believed his heart had frozen long ago. Whatever the truth, the court had learned not to expect tenderness from him. Today he stood before the altar wearing the expression of a man fulfilling an obligation rather than embracing a future. Several young ladies watched him from their seats with poorly concealed disappointment. More than one had dreamed of becoming queen. More than one had imagined softening the feared ruler's heart. Their ambitions had died the moment the marriage contract was announced. Now they waited eagerly for the chosen bride to fail. Near the front row sat Lord Ashbourne, Alara's father. His silver hair was neatly combed, yet anxiety tightened every line of his face. Years of financial hardship had diminished his family's standing, and though this marriage promised salvation, he appeared less relieved than terrified. He stared toward the cathedral entrance as though awaiting judgment rather than celebration. The music changed. Conversation faltered. Every gaze shifted toward the great doors. When they opened, winter sunlight spilled across the floor like pale gold. Lady Alara Ashbourne entered alone. A veil of ivory lace concealed her features from forehead to chin, drifting softly around her shoulders. Her gown was elegant but modest, lacking the excessive jewels favored by wealthier houses. She carried a bouquet of white roses clasped between trembling fingers. For a brief moment silence filled the cathedral. Then the whispers returned. She looks frightened. Perhaps she understands her fate. The poor thing knows he does not want her. Alara heard them. Their words reached her despite the distance. Years earlier, such cruelty might have broken her composure. Time had taught her otherwise. She continued forward with measured grace, her posture straight despite the weight pressing against her heart. Beneath the veil her eyes remained fixed upon the altar. If she acknowledged the insults, she would grant them power. Still, each whisper landed like a stone. She had spent much of her life enduring quiet humiliations. Compared to her dazzling cousins and celebrated sisters, she had always been overlooked. At gatherings she became background scenery. At dances she was the lady left standing after every partner had chosen. Society possessed a remarkable talent for teaching a woman her supposed worth. Today that lesson echoed from every corner of the cathedral. As Alara approached the altar, a noble woman rose from her seat. Duchess Vivian Ravenscroft. Renowned for her beauty and feared for her tongue, she had once been considered the most likely candidate to marry the king. The bitterness of that lost opportunity gleamed openly in her eyes. "How fortunate," she said loudly, ensuring half the cathedral could hear, "that His Majesty values duty above preference. Otherwise this marriage might never have occurred." A few nervous laughs escaped nearby guests. Others quickly joined. The sound spread through the cathedral. Alara stopped walking. The laughter was not deafening, yet its cruelty needed no volume. Heat climbed her cheeks beneath the veil. For one terrible moment she felt every eye upon her, measuring, judging, condemning. Even the priest appeared uncertain. Lord Ashbourne lowered his head in shame. The Duchess smiled. Then a voice cut through the cathedral like drawn steel. "Enough." The single word carried such authority that silence fell instantly. King Aldrich had not raised his voice. He did not need to. His gaze settled upon the Duchess with chilling calm. "No guest beneath my roof," he said, "shall be mocked while standing under royal protection." The cathedral froze. Shock rippled across every face. Aldrich Blackthorn, the king reputed to care for no one's feelings, had defended his bride before even speaking his vows. For the first time that morning, Ilara lifted her eyes toward him. Their gazes met. She could not see warmth there, not yet. But she saw something unexpected. Respect. The priest cleared his throat and resumed the ceremony. The congregation remained silent as Ilara reached the altar and took her place beside the towering king. The distance between them felt impossibly small. Candlelight flickered across silver embroidery and ancient stone while the kingdom watched. Then, as the vows prepared to begin, Aldrich slowly raised one gloved hand toward the delicate lace covering her face. Around them, hundreds held their breath. The veil trembled beneath his fingers, and in the suspended silence before it rose, destiny seemed to hesitate beside them. The lace veil lingered between concealment and revelation for only a heartbeat, yet that heartbeat seemed to stretch across the entire cathedral. Hundreds of eyes followed King Aldrich's hand as he carefully lifted the ivory fabric. The candles flickered. The winter wind pressed softly against stained glass. No one moved. Then the veil fell back. A collective gasp swept through the cathedral. Lady Ilara Ashbourne stood revealed beneath the golden glow of candlelight, and the rumors that had shaped her reputation shattered instantly. Her beauty was not the dazzling sort that demanded attention through extravagance. It possessed something rarer. Her features carried a delicate harmony, softened by thoughtful eyes that reflected both intelligence and quiet resilience. The gentleness of her expression stood in contrast to the harsh world that had judged her without mercy. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Even Duchess Vivian appeared stunned. The cruel certainty that had animated the crowd only moments before dissolved into confusion. Several noble women exchanged bewildered glances. Others looked away, embarrassed by the gossip they had eagerly repeated. The whispers returned, but now they carried a different tone. "She is beautiful. How could anyone call her plain? Who spread such lies?" Questions traveled through the congregation like sparks racing across dry grass. Yet none appeared more affected than the king himself. Aldrich had faced armies without hesitation. He had stood upon battlefields soaked with blood and smoke. He had negotiated treaties while enemies searched for weaknesses in his gaze. Now, standing before a single woman, he found himself momentarily speechless. The beauty before him surprised him, but it was not beauty alone that captured his attention. When Ilara met his eyes, he saw neither vanity nor triumph. He saw relief. Relief that the ridicule had finally ended. Relief mixed with lingering hurt. She had endured every insult without protest. Even now, there was no bitterness in her expression. Only dignity. Something unfamiliar stirred within him. Respect had come first. Curiosity followed close behind. The priest recovered from his astonishment and resumed the ceremony. The ancient vows echoed through the cathedral. Ilara answered with steady grace despite the emotional storm surrounding her. Aldrich listened carefully as she pledged loyalty and devotion to a man she barely knew. When his turn came, the words felt unexpectedly significant. "I shall honor this union before God, crown, and kingdom." His voice resonated through the sanctuary. The vow sounded less like obligation than conviction. Ilara noticed the subtle difference. So did many others. The ceremony concluded beneath a silence far different from the one that had preceded it. Earlier, the crowd had anticipated humiliation. Now uncertainty dominated every expression. As the newly married couple walked down the aisle together, guests bowed respectfully. The mockery was gone. In its place stood fascination. Outside, bells rang triumphantly across the capital. Snowflakes drifted from a pale sky, settling upon carriages and rooftops as citizens celebrated their new queen. Yet within the royal procession, Ilara remained cautious. One moment of public admiration could never erase years of rejection. Beauty had altered the crowd's judgment with alarming speed. The realization unsettled her. As the royal carriage carried them toward Blackthorn Palace, silence settled between husband and wife. The interior glowed with warm lamplight. Beyond the windows, winter landscapes passed in silver and white. Ilara folded her hands neatly within her lap. Aldrich observed her quietly. Most women in her position would have seized the opportunity to impress a king. Many would have filled the silence with charm or ambition. Ilara did neither. She sat with composed restraint, gazing through the frosted glass. At last Aldrich spoke. "You endured considerable cruelty this morning." His voice carried neither pity nor judgment, only observation. Ilara lowered her eyes briefly. "I have endured worse, Your Majesty." The simplicity of her answer struck him harder than any complaint could have. A person accustomed to kindness would never speak such words so calmly. The carriage continued forward. Neither spoke again. Yet something subtle shifted between them. Not affection. Not trust. Only the first fragile thread of understanding. By evening, Blackthorn Palace blazed with celebration. Crystal chandeliers illuminated vast halls filled with music, laughter, and glittering jewels. The wedding feast gathered the kingdom's most influential figures beneath one roof. Servants carried silver trays laden with delicacies. Musicians performed beneath banners bearing the royal wolf. Throughout the festivities, attention remained fixed upon the new queen. Every glance sought answers. Why had such false rumors surrounded her? Who had benefited from her disgrace? And why had the king defended her so readily? The mystery only deepened as the evening progressed. Ilara carried herself with remarkable composure despite relentless scrutiny. She greeted guests politely. She listened more than she spoke. Whenever someone offered insincere praise, she responded with graceful restraint. Gradually, even those determined to dislike her found themselves disarmed. Near the feast's conclusion, Aldrich rose from his seat. Conversation faded immediately. The king rarely made spontaneous public gestures. Servants approached carrying a velvet cushion. Resting upon it lay an exquisite necklace fashioned from silver and moonstones. Gasps rippled through the hall. The piece was instantly recognizable. For generations, it had belonged exclusively to beloved queens of House Blackthorn. Aldrich descended from the dais. The hall watched in astonishment as he stopped before Ilara. Without ceremony or hesitation, he lifted the necklace. The moonstones shimmered beneath candlelight like captured stars. Then he placed it around her neck. Silence engulfed the room. The gesture carried enormous significance. This was not merely a wedding gift. It was a declaration. A public statement that the woman beside him possessed his protection and favor. Ilara's eyes widened. For the first time all day, genuine surprise overcame her composure. "Your Majesty," she whispered. Aldrich met her gaze. "It belongs to the queen." The words were simple, yet they transformed the atmosphere of the hall. Nobles exchanged stunned looks. Several ladies appeared openly jealous. Across the room, Duchess Vivian's face hardened into something far colder than disappointment. The celebration continued, but beneath its elegance new tensions quietly emerged. Smiles concealed resentment. Compliments disguised calculations. The queen's sudden rise had altered the balance of power within the court. Long after midnight, when the festivities finally ended, Ilara returned to her chambers exhausted. Moonlight spilled across polished floors. A fire crackled softly within the hearth. Upon a small table beside the door rested a sealed envelope she had never seen before. No servant waited nearby. No sender's name appeared upon the parchment. Unease tightened within her chest. Slowly she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Only a single sentence appeared inside. The ink seemed almost black beneath the candlelight. A queen can disappear as easily as a veil can fall. As the fire crackled behind her, Ilara stared at the chilling words and realized that the wedding had not ended the cruelty surrounding her. It had merely transformed it into something far more dangerous. Sleep abandoned Queen Ilara long before dawn. The anonymous letter remained upon her bedside table, its chilling message lingering in her thoughts like a shadow that refused to retreat before daylight. By morning, the threatening words had not lost their power. If anything, they seemed more dangerous beneath the bright honesty of the sun. Whoever had written the note possessed confidence, influence, or both. Such threats were rarely made by powerless people. Yet when Ilara appeared at breakfast, she carried herself with the same composed dignity the court had already begun to associate with her. Blackthorn Palace awakened around her in a display of royal grandeur. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, illuminating marble corridors and silver-framed portraits of long-dead monarchs. Servants moved quietly through the halls. Courtiers bowed as she passed. Outwardly, she had become one of the most powerful women in the kingdom. Inwardly, uncertainty still accompanied every step. The sudden transformation in how society treated her remained difficult to trust. Only days earlier those same nobles had mocked her existence. Now they praised her beauty. Neither judgment felt entirely honest. As she entered the royal breakfast chamber, she found King Aldrich already seated beside a long window overlooking snow-covered gardens. The king's imposing frame dominated the room even in silence. Yet there was something unexpectedly peaceful about him this morning. A shaft of pale sunlight touched the dark strands of his hair while he studied several reports spread across the table. When he noticed her arrival, he immediately stood. The gesture surprised her. No man outside her family had ever risen simply because she entered a room. "Your Majesty," he greeted. Elara smiled softly. "Your Majesty." For the briefest moment amusement flickered across his face. Perhaps one of us should surrender the title. The unexpected humor caught her off guard. A quiet laugh escaped before she could stop it. To her surprise, Aldrich appeared pleased by the sound. Breakfast passed with measured conversation. They spoke of court obligations, winter preparations, and charitable petitions arriving from distant villages. The discussion remained formal, yet Elara gradually discovered something unexpected. Aldrich listened, not merely out of courtesy. He genuinely considered her opinions. When she suggested additional aid for struggling farming communities affected by severe storms, he questioned her reasoning thoughtfully rather than dismissing her perspective. Many rulers preferred admiration. This one preferred honesty. The realization altered her perception of him. Meanwhile, Aldrich found himself studying his queen more frequently than he intended. Her beauty continued to attract attention throughout the palace, yet it was not beauty occupying his thoughts. It was kindness. Every servant received the same respect she offered noble guests. Every conversation revealed patience rather than ambition. Most remarkable of all, she seemed entirely unaware of the effect she had upon people. The contrast fascinated him. Over the following weeks, subtle changes unfolded between them. Neither spoke openly of friendship. Neither acknowledged growing comfort. Yet opportunities to spend time together appeared with increasing frequency. When Elara mentioned her love of literature during one conversation, rare volumes began arriving at her chambers. Ancient histories, collections of poetry, beautifully bound novels imported from distant kingdoms. Each arrived without explanation. Each carried the royal seal. The gifts were thoughtful rather than extravagant. That distinction mattered. Elsewhere in the kingdom, Lord Ashbourne received unexpected assistance restoring his neglected estate. Roofs were repaired. Farmland was improved. Debts quietly disappeared. Elara soon discovered the source. "You helped my family," she said one evening while they walked through a gallery lined with candlelit portraits. Aldrich kept his gaze forward. "They are family now." The simplicity of the statement affected her more deeply than grand declarations could have. Nobody had ever protected her family without expecting something in return. For Aldrich, however, the gestures felt natural. The more he learned about Elara, the more determined he became to ease burdens she had carried alone. One snowy afternoon, he invited her into the palace conservatory. Glass walls surrounded a hidden garden sheltered from winter's cruelty. Exotic flowers bloomed beneath carefully maintained warmth. Fragrant blossoms filled the air with delicate perfume. At the center stood a single white rose unlike any she had ever seen. Its petals appeared almost luminous. Elara approached carefully. "It is beautiful. It blooms only once each year," Aldrich said. She turned toward him. "Why show it to me?" His expression softened. "Because it was cultivated for royal brides." For several seconds neither spoke. The moment felt strangely intimate. Not romantic. Not yet. But undeniably personal. Elara touched one petal lightly. Something warm stirred within her chest. Perhaps trust. Perhaps hope. Unfortunately, hope rarely survives unnoticed. Across the palace, resentment continued to grow. Duchess Vivian watched every interaction with increasing bitterness. The queen's popularity expanded steadily. Servants admired her. Citizens praised her generosity. Even influential nobles had begun seeking her favor. The position Vivian once imagined for herself now belonged entirely to another woman. Jealousy hardened into determination. Soon new rumors appeared. Whispers suggested Elara had manipulated the king. Others claimed she concealed ambitious motives beneath a gentle smile. False stories circulated through salons, banquets, and drawing rooms. The attacks spread carefully enough to avoid direct accusation while causing maximum damage. Elara became aware of them almost immediately. The familiarity hurt more than she expected. Once again, strangers judged a version of her that did not exist. Once again, she found herself defending silence against lies. The situation reached its breaking point during the winter sovereign ball. Hundreds of nobles gathered beneath glittering chandeliers while musicians performed elegant waltzes. Diamonds sparkled beneath candlelight. Rich fabrics swirled across polished floors. The evening began peacefully. Then Duchess Vivian made her move. Positioning herself at the center of several influential guests, she raised her voice just enough to attract attention. "Some women possess remarkable talent," she remarked. "Particularly those capable of convincing powerful men to mistake calculation for virtue." The implication was unmistakable. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. A heavy silence descended. Elara stood motionless. The familiar sting of public humiliation returned. Vivian smiled sweetly. Several nobles waited eagerly to witness the queen's response. Before Elara could speak, movement appeared across the ballroom. King Aldrich had heard every word. The crowd parted instinctively as he crossed the floor. His expression revealed nothing. His eyes revealed everything. Without addressing the Duchess, he stopped before Elara. Then he extended his hand. For a heartbeat, the entire court seemed suspended between expectation and consequence. "Your Majesty," he said quietly enough for only her to hear, "would you honor me with this dance?" Elara placed her hand in his. Together they stepped onto the ballroom floor while hundreds watched in stunned silence. The musicians resumed their melody, but Aldrich's gaze remained fixed upon his queen. Around them, whispers surged like gathering storm clouds. Yet across the far side of the ballroom, something else caught the king's attention. Near a marble column stood an unfamiliar court official quickly concealing a folded document. The glimpse lasted only an instant, but Aldrich recognized the royal seal stamped upon the parchment, and knew immediately that it should not have been there. The image of the hidden document remained fixed in Aldrich's mind long after the music ended. While the nobles admired chandeliers and exchanged polished smiles, the king's instincts sharpened. Years of warfare had taught him to recognize danger before others could see it. The court official's reaction had not been the nervousness of an innocent man. It had been fear. Yet he concealed his concern behind calm composure as he guided Elara through the dance. The grand ballroom glowed beneath hundreds of candles suspended from crystal chandeliers. Gold light reflected across polished marble floors while violins carried a melancholy melody through the air. Around them, the court pretended to enjoy the evening. Behind elegant masks and refined manners, however, ambition moved like poison through blood. Elara sensed the tension. "You are troubled," she said quietly. Aldrich lowered his gaze toward her. "What makes you think so? You have not looked at the musicians once." The observation surprised him. Most people noticed only his size, his reputation, or his authority. Elara noticed details. A faint smile touched his lips. "Perhaps my queen knows me better than I realized." The words warmed her unexpectedly. Not because they suggested affection. Because they suggested trust. As the dance continued, she became increasingly aware of how safe she felt beside him. The sensation was unfamiliar. For most of her life, she had navigated rooms carefully, anticipating ridicule or dismissal. Beside Aldrich, those fears weakened. The king's presence seemed to create a barrier between her and the world's cruelty. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that might contain happiness. Unfortunately, happiness often arrives just before a storm. The following morning, Aldrich ordered a discreet investigation into the document he had seen at the ball. Trusted guards began tracing its origins while the king quietly examined palace records. The discoveries unsettled him. Anonymous payments had been made to several servants shortly before the wedding. Letters had vanished from royal archives. False reports regarding Lady Elara Ashbourne's appearance and character had circulated through noble circles for months before the marriage contract became public. None of it appeared accidental. Someone had worked deliberately to destroy Elara's reputation. The realization awakened a protective fury within him. What disturbed him most was the scale of the deception. This had never been simple gossip. It had been a campaign. Someone had wanted the future queen isolated, ridiculed, and vulnerable. Someone powerful. Days later, another revelation emerged. One of the palace servants confessed to receiving money in exchange for spreading damaging stories about Elara among visiting nobles. Under questioning, he revealed several names. Among them was Duchess Vivian Ravenscroft. Aldrich's expression darkened. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Yet before confronting anyone, he needed certainty. Meanwhile, Elara faced a different battle. Although public admiration continued growing, the old wounds beneath her composure remained unhealed. Learning about the investigation forced painful memories back to the surface. She remembered every dance invitation that never came. Every conversation abruptly ending when she approached. Every comparison that left her feeling invisible. For years she had believed those experiences reflected her own shortcomings. Now another possibility emerged. Perhaps she had been condemned before society ever truly knew her. The realization brought not comfort but grief. Entire years had been stolen from her. One rainy evening, unable to bear the palace crowds, Ilara sought refuge within the conservatory. Beyond the glass walls, storm clouds covered the sky. Rain streaked down the panes in silver rivers while distant thunder rolled across the horizon. The familiar white rose bloomed quietly at the center of the room, untouched by the weather raging outside. Ilara stood beside it, staring at the petals without seeing them. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. She turned. Aldrich entered alone. For a moment neither spoke. The atmosphere felt different from previous encounters. More intimate. More honest. The king stopped beside her. "You know," he said gently. It was not a question. Ilara nodded. "I know enough." Rain tapped softly against the glass. Aldrich looked toward the storm. The investigation confirmed it. "Your reputation was attacked intentionally." The words landed heavily despite her preparation. Hearing the truth spoken aloud transformed suspicion into reality. She lowered her eyes. Then all those years. None of it was deserved. Emotion tightened her throat. For so long she had accepted society's judgment as fact. Now she discovered strangers had written the verdict before she ever entered the courtroom. Aldrich watched her carefully. The sight of her pain affected him far more than he expected. He had spent years believing strength meant emotional distance. Yet standing beside Ilara, distance became impossible. "I spent my life trying to earn kindness," she admitted quietly. "If I behaved perfectly, perhaps people would accept me. If I remained patient, perhaps they would see my worth." Her voice trembled. They never did. The confession broke something inside him. Not because she sounded weak. Because she had endured such loneliness while remaining kind. Aldrich stepped closer. "You were never the problem." The certainty in his voice made her look up. Their eyes met. The world beyond the conservatory seemed to disappear. Only truth remained. Ilara studied the man before her. The feared king. The giant warrior. The ruler whose name inspired both loyalty and fear. Yet beneath the power, she now saw something few others noticed. Loneliness. A different loneliness from her own. But loneliness nonetheless. "You accepted this marriage because it benefited the kingdom," she said softly. "I did. And nothing more?" Aldrich exhaled slowly. The question deserved honesty. "When the arrangement was proposed, I viewed it as duty." The answer stung despite her expectations. Yet he was not finished. "The day of our wedding changed that." Silence settled between them. Rain continued falling outside. Ilara's heartbeat quickened. Aldrich's gaze never left hers. "Not because your veil revealed beauty," he said. "Beauty fades. It cannot hold a kingdom together." His voice lowered. "What changed everything was seeing your strength." The word struck deeper than any compliment. "You stood before an entire cathedral determined to humiliate you. You took another step forward. You heard every insult. Another step. You endured every whisper. Now only inches separated them. And you faced all of it with dignity." Emotion filled Ilara's eyes. Years of hurt collided with years of hope. Aldrich reached for her hand. His touch was gentle despite his enormous strength. "Many women desired my throne." His voice carried absolute sincerity. "You were the first who never asked for it." The walls around her heart finally cracked. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Not tears of sorrow. Relief. Validation. Healing. Without thinking, she stepped toward him. Aldrich opened his arms. For the first time they embraced. The moment felt less like a beginning than a homecoming neither had expected. Outside, thunder shook the palace. Inside, two wounded souls found understanding. The embrace lingered. Then suddenly the conservatory doors burst open. A royal guard rushed inside, soaked by rain and breathing hard. The urgency in his expression shattered the tranquility instantly. He dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty," he said, struggling for breath. "We have uncovered the final evidence." Aldrich's face hardened. "What evidence?" The guard swallowed. "The conspiracy reaches far deeper than Duchess Vivian. Several members of the High Council are involved." A stunned silence followed. Then the guard delivered the final blow. "They are preparing to accuse the Queen publicly tomorrow." The storm outside roared louder, and as Aldrich tightened his grip on Ilara's hand, both realized the true battle had only just begun. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of iron. Storm clouds lingered above Blackthorn Palace as though the heavens themselves sensed the confrontation about to unfold. Servants moved through corridors with unusual caution. Guards stood at heightened attention. Rumors had already spread throughout the capital. Something extraordinary was about to happen. Within her chambers, Queen Alara stood before a tall mirror while a maid fastened the moonstone necklace around her neck. The royal heirloom shimmered softly against her gown. Weeks earlier, the jewelry had felt foreign upon her skin. Today it felt like armor. Yet despite her composure, fear remained. Not fear for her safety. Fear of returning to the helplessness she had fought so hard to overcome. A knock sounded at the door. Moments later, King Aldrich entered. The maid quietly withdrew. Silence settled between husband and wife. Alara immediately noticed the change in him. The warmth she had seen in the conservatory remained, but it now existed beside something colder. Determination. The king crossed the room. Without speaking, he took her hand. His touch steadied her. "They will attack your character today," he said. "I know. They will lie. I know." His jaw tightened. "They will try to make you stand alone." At that, Alara looked directly into his eyes. "And will I?" The answer came instantly. "Never." A profound calm settled over her heart. No grand speech could have carried greater meaning. For years she had endured every battle alone. Today would be different. Together they walked toward the grand assembly hall. The chamber represented the center of royal authority within the kingdom. Towering marble columns stretched toward vaulted ceilings adorned with silver wolves and ancient crowns. Hundreds of nobles filled the galleries. Members of the High Council occupied elevated seats near the throne. Every face reflected anticipation. Some hoped for justice. Others hoped for scandal. Aldrich and Alara entered side by side. The room fell silent. Neither rushed. Neither lowered their gaze. They crossed the vast chamber with the confidence of people who had nothing left to hide. When they reached the dais, Lord Cedric Hawthorne, one of the kingdom's most influential council members, rose from his seat. His expression carried carefully crafted concern. "Your Majesty," he began, addressing Aldrich, "it is with great reluctance that we bring troubling information before the crown." The performance was convincing. Had Aldrich not already known the truth, he might have admired it. Cedric produced several documents. "We possess evidence suggesting Her Majesty obtained influence through deception and concealed associations that threaten the stability of the kingdom." Murmurs erupted throughout the hall. Alara remained motionless. Months earlier such accusations would have shattered her confidence. Now she merely listened. Cedric continued. One accusation followed another. Forged letters. Invented witnesses. Fabricated scandals. Each lie had been carefully designed to attack not her position but her integrity. Because her enemies finally understood something important. The people loved their queen. Only by destroying her character could they hope to destroy her influence. As the accusations mounted, several nobles nodded grimly. Others exchanged uncertain glances. The forged evidence appeared convincing. Exactly as intended. At last Cedric concluded. "For the good of the kingdom, we request that Queen Alara be removed from her position pending formal investigation." Silence followed. The conspirators waited. They expected confusion. They expected hesitation. Most of all, they expected Aldrich to choose duty over love. Instead, the king slowly rose. The movement alone commanded attention. His towering frame seemed larger than ever. The hall became perfectly silent. Aldrich descended the dais one measured step at a time. His gaze swept across the assembled council. When he finally spoke, his voice carried through the chamber like distant thunder. "You spent months preparing this." The statement was simple. Yet several council members visibly stiffened. Aldrich continued walking. "You bribed servants." Another step. "You forged correspondence." Another. "You manipulated witnesses." Fear began appearing where confidence once stood. Cedric's face paled. The king stopped directly before him. "And worst of all," Aldrich said, his voice growing colder, "you believed I would not discover it." The hall exploded into whispers. Cedric attempted to respond. "Your Majesty, I assure." Enough. The word struck with the force of a hammer. Aldrich raised one hand. The great doors opened immediately. Royal guards entered. Behind them came servants, clerks, messengers, and witnesses. Dozens. Every face belonged to someone connected to the conspiracy. Shock spread through the chamber. One by one, witnesses testified. Payments were revealed. Instructions were exposed. Forged documents were identified. The anonymous campaign against Alara unraveled before everyone's eyes. Each revelation struck harder than the last. Several conspirators attempted denials. Others remained silent. None escaped the evidence. Then came the final blow. A royal investigator stepped forward carrying a collection of letters. Among them was proof that Duchess Vivian and multiple council members had orchestrated the rumors surrounding Alara long before her wedding. The entire campaign had been designed to humiliate her publicly, weaken her authority, and eventually remove her from court. Gasps echoed through the hall. Many nobles looked physically ill. The scale of the betrayal exceeded anything they had imagined. Cedric collapsed back into his chair. Defeat filled his expression. The game was over. Aldrich turned toward the assembly. The queen was judged before she was known. His voice resonated throughout the chamber. She was mocked before she was heard. He looked toward Alara. And despite every cruelty, she answered hatred with grace. The room remained silent. No one dared interrupt. Aldrich climbed the dais once more. Then, before the entire kingdom, he extended his hand toward his queen. Alara approached. The distance between them felt symbolic. A journey from isolation to belonging. From shame to dignity. From arrangement to love. When she reached him, Aldrich did something no one expected. The king of Blackthorn knelt. The entire hall gasped. Queens knelt before kings. Kings did not kneel before anyone. Yet Aldrich lowered himself willingly. Not as a ruler. As a man. Emotion filled Alara's eyes. For a moment neither spoke. Then Aldrich looked up at her. The vulnerability in his expression carried more power than any crown. The day your veil fell, he said, my kingdom changed. Every person present listened. The day I learned your heart, so did I. Tears shimmered in Alara's eyes. The hall remained utterly still. Aldrich's next words belonged not to politics or ceremony. They belonged to truth. I accepted this marriage because duty demanded it. The confession echoed softly. But duty cannot explain what I feel now. His voice grew gentler. You taught me that strength can be kind. Alara's breath caught. You taught me that dignity survives cruelty. The king smiled. And you taught me that a throne means very little if there is no one beside you worth sharing it with. The final barriers around her heart dissolved completely. For the first time since entering the kingdom, she no longer felt like a stranger. Aldrich rose. Alara stepped forward. The embrace that followed was met not with whispers but applause. At first only a few joined. Then dozens. Then hundreds. The entire hall erupted. The sound rolled through the chamber like a wave. Not because a queen had been vindicated. Because goodness had prevailed over cruelty. The conspirators were stripped of rank and authority before the assembly concluded. Their influence vanished in a single afternoon. Yet punishment was not what people remembered. They remembered the king kneeling. They remembered the queen standing tall. They remembered truth defeating deception. Months later, spring arrived. Snow melted from palace gardens. White roses bloomed throughout the kingdom. Prosperity returned to regions long neglected. The people embraced Alara not because of beauty, titles, or royal favor, but because they recognized her character. One golden evening, Aldrich and Alara stood together outside Blackthorn Cathedral. The same cathedral where laughter had once followed her every step. Now citizens gathered there simply to celebrate. Children ran through flower-lined paths. Music drifted through warm air. No whispers remained. Only joy. As the setting sun bathed the ancient stone in gold, Alara looked toward the king who had once been a stranger and was now the greatest certainty of her life. Aldrich took her hand. Neither needed words. Some stories change kingdoms through war. Others change them through power. But the story remembered for generations was the one in which a queen endured humiliation without surrendering her dignity, and a giant Lycan king discovered that true beauty was never hidden beneath a veil. It had always existed within the brave heart beating beneath it. The kingdom flourished under their rule, and long after both crowns had passed into history, people still spoke of the day love stood before an entire nation and refused to bow before cruelty.